You guys sound fantastic this morning. Thank you. That was awesome. And I always have to thank Reverend Lisa Davis, too, because I'm a big fan of hers and she's a mentor of mine, and I think it's always an honor when she trusts me with you all. So I'm grateful for that. And unexpectedly, my other mentor minister, Jane Hyatt, is here from Bend. So it's really neat. I didn't know she was going to be here. So it's really cool to have you here. I am just going to tell some stories today because we are a storytelling species, and there will be a point to some of these meandering stories, at least I hope so. Many years ago now, I was in Maui, Hawaii, with my partner, John, and we were out in kayaks on the ocean. It was a still blue, a quiet day. The blue water was very flat and still, and we had been seeing whale spouts. This was the time of the year when the humpback whales are there to mate and have babies and take care of their babies, and we'd been seeing the spouts off in a distance, and at this point in my life, I had never been up close with a whale, and I so wanted it, and we're bobbing along in the kayak, and I'm hoping, and they're way over in the distance, and I put my hand down in the water, and I just said, whale people, if it's not too much trouble, if you could come by, we'd be so respectful, we'd love it so much. And then we're still seeing spouts, and then it's getting closer. The spouts are a little closer, and pretty soon, this huge being launches itself up out of the water, bent in our direction. And it does that several times. And the last time that it came up was so close to us, you could see the striations in the blubber. And when it hit that time, it dove, and it just left us bouncing in the little kayaks, But it took me a moment, I don't even know how long, honestly, time stood still, to realize I had tears streaming down my face. It was just, talk about an experience of being in the present moment, right? It was awe. And a little while later, we had a mother whale and her calf come by, and they were like swimming around under the kayak. You could hear whale song coming up through the kayak. Now, my question at that time was, did they hear my communication? Did I call them? I like the thought of that, right? There's no way to know. Maybe they were curious about us. The cool thing about it, and the title of my talk today is The Power of Story and Nature's Narratives. Because one of the threads, I think, of nature's story for sure is that there is so much more going on in this world, in this reality, than we can even have any understanding of. We literally have no idea the level of intelligence and emotionality of whales, right? We guess at it. There's always more going on than what our senses can detect. On the way here this morning, I was listening to a podcast, Hidden Brain, I think, on NPR, and they were talking to a cognitive scientist, and the whole show was about how we humans tend to think we know a lot more than we know. The whole thing's like, okay, yeah, that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about a little bit. And they actually, there's a term that they use in the cognitive scientific field, which I learned about in this podcast this morning, called the illusion of knowledge, right? We just think we know a lot more than we do. And sometimes that can be daunting or feel a little shaky. Often, though, it's really awesome, because if we're looking at difficult circumstances, dark things, to just be able to step back and say, maybe there's a lot more going on here than at first appearance. So our stories have power. We use stories to describe the events of our lives, to frame our memories. We craft our personal identities, sometimes over and over and over again, through the stories that we tell. Stories also weave history, and they shape culture. Stories compose narratives that affect worldviews. Now, currently, much of our Western culture is caught in a political and cultural climate of battling narratives. You've got interests on different ends of a spectrum that tell different stories with an agenda, trying to drive a certain agenda. We're literally living at a time when, depending upon the stories that you're hearing and telling, your view of reality is very, very different from a lot of our neighbors right now. This is the place that we are in currently in the evolution of humanity. I pay a lot of attention to news. I am a cultural commentator and a writer, and I think I just tend to have pretty good resiliency toward it, but sometimes it's a bit much. And when I start to feel just a little depressed or a little down or a little rattled, I find great personal comfort in tuning into the stories that nature's telling, those bigger stories. There's something really cool that happens here in Only, Oregon. There is a little butterfly called the Fender's Blue butterfly. It's a little guy, total wingspan's about an inch wide. It only lives in certain grassland area in Willamette Valley, and it was almost extinct. They did a bunch of grassland restoration, reintroduced native plants, and the Fender's Blue is on the upswing again. Now, what's really intriguing about this little insect, because it's so small, though in the caterpillar phase and the worm phase, it's this little tiny green worm, and it's very vulnerable. And when that little worm is going along doing its thing, and it attracts a predator, let's say bigger beetles that will eat it, it twerks its body really hard, and that sends out this high-pitched sound that the ants respond to. Because over millennia, they have formed a symbiotic relationship. The ants will rush in, provide assistance and help protect this little worm, and in result, the caterpillar will drop a little drop of sweet-tasting nectar that the ants eat. Isn't that cool? Only right here in your backyard, right? It's very, very special. Now, if you think about it, our primary cultural story is it's all about dog eat dog. It's all about competition, right? But nature so often shows us it's actually about collaboration, mutuality, benefiting one another, even in very creative ways. So imagine how this culture will shift when our story, our most widely held story, shifts from one of rugged individualists, which is BS anyway, rugged individualism and competitive this, and it's always got to be winners or losers. Imagine how that will shift when we really start to biomimic nature and become more collaborative, more cooperative, when that becomes our cultural theme. I think we're headed in that direction. I think that's why we've got some of the bumps that we're going through. It's all getting exposed right now. Imagine what it will be like when, on grand scale, we learn that leadership is not about seizing power, but surrendering to service. That'll shift things, right? There's enough nodding heads in this room to know that already. Now, one of the most empowering learnings that I have gained through Unity and New Thought is that we do have the right and the ability to control our thinking and to control our own narrative, to create our own stories and recreate our own stories. I was raised a rough little farm kid up in the foothills of Washington State by Okie parents, and I was raised to fight, and I was raised to be tough. And I was pretty good at it, it's like, and my identity built around being a fighter, being a hard worker, and being able to push through anything. And as it turns out, I created a life over the next few decades where I had to do a lot of that, right? And as life will often do to us fighters, it wore me down. It got a little too hard at some point. I went through some really intense, life-changing, prolonged experiences, and I just finally realized I was in a super broken, low moment, and it's like, man, I'm tired of fighting. I need a new story. I need a new way to describe my modus operandi for navigating this world that we're going through. I didn't want to fight my way anymore. I wanted to love my way through. And I literally, using tools that we gain right here in Unity and New Thought, I started actively doing that, actively catching when I was telling the old story and then moving to allow for something more, allowing my identity to open up a little bit so I could step into something else. Now, my own story, I know I can be tough and all that if I have to. I still got that in my wheelhouse, you know? But I also know that I'm learning to have a level of consciousness that allows more ease, more support, more love, and it is so much more fun. But it had to happen with me opening a little bit of a crack in the story that I was willing to tell about myself and to myself. Now, not only can we choose our own story about who we are now, we can choose to rewrite our histories. And I've learned this in a powerful way as well. When I went through all those those couple of years of really hard stuff, people would ask me, you know, what happened? And I could say, well, we got publicly shamed, politically taken down, investigated by the FBI, the DOJ, wrecked my business, upset my family. That's all true. It's all true. I could also say, well, something really intense came out of the blue. It was hard. I decided to use it as an unasked for sabbatical. I did a lot of inner work, because that's all I could do at that time. I did a lot of inner work, started ministerial studies, wrote a book. All that's still true. Which is more empowering? So that was a profound experience for me. I think the human species, as far as we know, is the only species that has this predilection toward identifying in the victim identity. There's a lot of that, and I'm speaking from the I, especially childhood stuff, right? The more I am finding, the more I choose an empowering story to tell the history, the more that plays into the present. So the power of story. And nature shows over and over and over, there really is no survival value in playing victim. You don't see very many of our fellow species doing that. They get over something hard, they move on, right? And they're looking for opportunity in the present moment. I think that's such a profound example for us. Earlier this year, another story, we had the incredible experience of flying up into North Alaska, going to this place called Base Camp Borealis. And do you know what glamping? Well, this is a glamping adventure. I mean, it's kind of camping out, but boy, is it in luxury. And you stay in these little domed white buildings that are designed to look like an igloo, but they got all kinds of nice amenities inside. And the whole ceiling and window. It's plexiglass. So you lay in your bed in there, looking up at the sky, hoping for the northern lights. And they even have a thing called the aurora alarm. So if the northern lights come out at 2 a.m., the alarm goes off, and they'll come get you. I mean, but you don't want to miss it. And I had never seen I'm nature girl, and I had never seen the northern lights before. We got so lucky, so blessed. And pretty soon, even night one, we're watching, and all of a sudden, this green and purple streak just plays across the sky. Then it starts to dance and move a little. And it's just awe-inspiring. And here's one of the many really cool things about this story. Northern lights, or the aurora borealis, are the result of plasma material flung off the sun that travels, I had to write, 93 million miles to Earth, pulled by the gravitational or the magnetic pull. It gets 93 million miles in like 24 to 48 hours. And then it gets attracted to the poles because that's where this planet's magnetic pull is strongest. You can see it with your human eyes, but you actually get much more vivid images of it through a camera. because the camera lens allows more light in than our eyes can. This is such a great example of all of this stuff that's going on that's beyond the scope of our typically used senses. Now, every morning we would wake up in this little igloo, and we'd go out, and the snow, lots of snow up there, of course, all these little tracks, probably snowshoe hares and the boreal squirrels, and who knows what else was out there that we were oblivious to. That's another part of the narrative of nature, that it's going on. This stuff, this life, this creative force, it's going on and can be paid attention to and can be tapped into, even when we're unaware of it. A little while after that, in my work as an environmentalist, I wanted to go down to the place, it's in Hornbrook, California, where they had just taken out the 4th dam of the largest dam removal project in US and possibly world history. It was 4 dams on the Klamath River on the border of Oregon and California. And I wanted to just go and bear witness to this because it's really an historic environmental conservation project. And the history of this place is that in the mid-1800s, the Yurok, Karok, and Hoopa tribes who lived there were forced into reservation, forced off their traditional lands, and they watched as these dams were built for Pacific Power. It was for generating electricity. These dams were built. It blocked the spawning grounds that the salmon typically used, and salmon disappeared. And environmentalists and tribes had worked for years to try to get something done and to try to get the dams removed or whatever, but there was always resistance to it. But as happens, consciousness shifts and things changed. And those dams got old enough that the power company, Pacific Power, they were either going to have to pay a lot of money to retrofit and upgrade. By that time, they had a lot of other electricity sources. So they opened up to, gosh, maybe it just makes more sense to remove them. And guys, I can tell you, when I rounded the corner on this winding gravel road up above this river, and I came to the viewpoint, got out and looked, and you could see the whole basin that I was looking at had just a month before been underwater. It had been flooded out. The river really was not a river. Now I'm looking down, and there's a wild, free-flowing river running through it again. And everything is denuded because it had been flooded, but already along the river, vibrant green vegetation. It was already recovering. A little further downstream on the way out, I stopped. I was way above the river at that lookout point. I wanted to actually touch it. I wanted to bless it. And I stopped down below, and I got out, and the water is really turbid and dark and dirty because it was washing out 100 years of sediment. And it was such a powerful metaphor for me. Once we remove our dams, things really can flow and heal very quickly and restore new growth once we unblock that. Now, the coolest thing about this, 3 days after I got home, biologists reported that they had seen the first salmon going past where that dam had just been. That makes me misty. That brings tears to my eyes. There's pictures online. I've written about it too. And within just a couple of months, reports came back that more than 6,000 salmonid, wild salmonid, had made it up there this year. Researchers thought that that would take years to get to that point. It can heal, and we can heal. Rivers and consciousnesses both can heal very quickly when we unblock them. Right now in this world, we are in a time of trouble, maybe a story of trouble. It's a heavy time, and I know a lot of us are feeling it. I hear from a lot of us that are feeling it, and speaking from the eye, I'm feeling it. Thomas Berry, he's a cultural historian. He wrote, It's all a question of story. We're in trouble just now because we do not have a good story. We're in between stories. The old story, the account of how we fit into it, is no longer effective, yet we have not learned the new story. I like to tweak that just a little to say, yet we have not created the new story. We are in need of stories. You know, ancestors and prophecies from many different cultures and places sort of called for times like these. And nearly all of them note that when we are in times like these, it is time to listen, because the earth is always speaking. It's always telling us that in the field of possibility, there's far more potential than what we see right in front of our faces, what we can touch with our senses. And nature does, her narrative is, she demonstrates that left and right. I may have shared this with you all before. I share it a lot because I love it. One of my very favorite words is chaord, C-H-A-O-R-D. And it means when pockets of new order rise up out of chaos. Again, look at nature. I visited Mount St. Helens not too long after the eruption, and there were already pockets of green. Little frogs had known how to get down on the leeward side of rocks so that they could dig in and survive. New order already coming out of seeming chaos. Forest fires that clear undergrowth to create meadows that are needed for many species, right? We have that same ability, I believe, in these fraught times to have a chaotic experience and have some new and better order rise up out of this. We are in a time of foment. Okay, yeah, let's clap for that. I was a little off script, and that was the only applause line. That tells me something. I just think for me, it's really important to face kind of what's before us and to be conscious and intentional about the stories that we are hearing, the stories that we are telling, not to be ostrich in the sand, not paying attention to what's going on, but using what we have, using our unity and new thought principles to approach the situation from a higher level of consciousness that allows order to flow through it. Part of the story that hasn't been working well for a long time, as far as I'm concerned, is that humans are apart from, separate from, and above all the rest of nature. I really have my whole career taken that story on. And it's not backed up by what we see around us. We humans are a part of, we are nature, right? We don't always behave most nicely with it, but we're a part of it, which means that as we craft better stories about ourselves, for ourselves, about one another, about our place in this world, as we each play our part crafting our stories, we affect and benefit the whole because we are connected to the whole. How we think about the planet, it's part of shaping a story. How we think about one another, how we think about ourselves. I truly believe we have the power to weave a more beautiful story and therefore a more beautiful world that works for all beings. And that is what I ask you today. What's your story? Namaste.